Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and you're about to hear the last of the legacy episodes, the episodes of this podcast that I originally recorded over a year ago when I was testing out the whole format and how it would work. I had another busy week, so I just thought I'd pop this in. Hope you enjoy listening to it. Talk about some then current film festival news for The Last Frankenstein, which is now ancient. But before we get into it, I just want to give a big shout out to Jay Leonard, our producer extraordinaire of The Last Frankenstein, whose recent film Break Glass, we've talked about it being on the film festival circuit, and it just was accepted into the Buffalo Dreams Fantastic Film Festival, which, as our Franken fans may remember, was a film event that our movie, our fright flick, The Last Frankenstein, also played at and won Best New York State Feature at. That's a film festival that's one of the driving creative forces behind it is filmmaker Gregory Lamberson, who fans of cult cinema know as the director of films like Slime City. And I actually went out to that film festival in person. It was one of the couple I was able to attend live and had a really great time. Both the event organizers and personnel and the audience were just really supportive, really engaged. That was the first film festival, not just the first film festival for my movie I'd ever been to. I think it was the first film festival, pretty much. I mean, I'd been to one years ago. There was one about 15 years ago I went to that was local, but that was the first one I ever really went to and really just experienced. And it was an excellent time that I had there. So I'm really excited that Jay's going to have this opportunity there, that Break Glass, his film, is going to be screening there. And I know he's planning to attend. And that's in August. So just follow his social media apps, Break Glass Movie on Facebook and the other apps to stay tuned with that. All right, without further ado, here is the last of the legacy episodes of Carpet City Cinema. Hey everyone, welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and we're coming up on a film festival weekend for our feature film, The Last Frankenstein. Today, the day I'm recording this, is February 15th, and this upcoming weekend, February 18th through the 20th, is the Mad Monster Party Film Festival, which is part of the Mad Monster Party convention down in Concord, North Carolina. And this is a really good opportunity for our movie. You know, some film festivals you submit to specifically because you want to get eyes on your movie from possible distributors. Some film festivals, it's the prestige, the status of being able to have your film in that festival or perhaps get awards from it, because then that can elevate possibilities for your movie to get picked up down the road. And sometimes it's just, about bringing your film to new audiences. And the Mad Monster Party convention that this festival is part of falls into that latter category. This is an event that has a really substantial following, so it does have awards, it does have a prestige to it. But really, I think more than anything, the reason I wanted to submit to this festival is just to get our film before a whole new audience. A lot of the people who have been following The Last Frankenstein and supporting us, which we just so greatly appreciate, that's been in the local community. And while that's done so much to keep our film alive and to set us up for successful future projects, we also want to broaden that audience base, and get in hopefully fans from other parts of the country, the world. This is that kind of an opportunity really to kind of bring the film to a whole new audience down in North Carolina. And this is not going to have a virtual component to this festival. So this is really just going to be, putting people in the seats at this event and them watching the movie and get it, hopefully they'll like it, enjoy it. But either way, whether they do or they don't, at least we'll get it before them. So that's coming up this weekend. So pretty exciting. There is an awards ceremony on this festival, so we'll see if anything comes of that too. That'd be a great honor. But again, just having the film there and the chance to engage with these people is really key. And of course, like I've continued to mention, we have our theatrical screening coming up locally at the Madison Theater in Albany. And again, another opportunity to just in our own region, maybe bring some new Franken fans on board. Now, the Mad Monster Party Convention, they've got a pretty solid guest list of people who will be attending that convention. Kane Hodder, who is probably definitely the actor most recognized for playing Jason Voorhees in the Friday the 13th films, will be there. Felissa Rose from Sleepaway Camp. John Russo, who co-wrote the original Night of the Living Dead. Robert Carradine, who, of course, I'm a huge fan of the Carradine family. And Robert actually is probably best known for his non-horror films because he was in the Revenge of the Nerds movies, and the whole another generation knows him from Lizzie McGuire. But like many people in his family, his career goes way back to the 70s, and he was in some horror films like Orca, which is a really fun Jaws ripoff. He did a couple of John Carpenter's later films too. But yeah, really just a really top lineup they've got there for guests. So pretty good opportunity for people to see our film, meet some icons of the genre, and just hopefully have a great time. So yeah, next weekend, that's coming up. Of course, this episode probably won't air till substantially after that festival's come and gone. Maybe by the time you listen to this, we'll know whether or not we won anything there. Speaking of genre icons, to me, genre icon, sad to see that actually this happened last summer, but only is just kind of starting to make the rounds now. That actress June Kenny, age 87, passed away last June. Kenny was a star of low-budget films of the 50s and into the early 60s. She did several films for Roger Corman, starring in Teenage Doll, Sorority Girl, and the tongue twister of a title, The Saga of the Viking Woman and Their Voyage to the Waters of the Great Sea Serpent. And those were films that Roger Corman directed, but she also appeared in one that he just produced, which was Hot Car Girl. And she also did a couple films with Burt I. Gordon, who, after Corman, is kind of the exploitation auteur I'm most associated with the boom of B movies in the late 50s, I think. She appeared in Attack of the Puppet People and Earth versus the Spider for Gordon. And Earth versus the Spider was the first film I saw of June Kenny, and she just became one of those faces that I associated with 50s horror and low-budget B movies. She also appeared in Bloodlust, which was shot in 1959 but not released till 61, which I enjoy a lot. It's a exploitation, low-budget take on the famous short story, The Most Dangerous Game. And like the 1930s adaptation of that story of the same name, also titled The Most Dangerous Game, which starred Joel McCrea and Fay Wray, Bloodlust also had some kind of surprising, somewhat for the time, obviously tame by today's standards, gore shots and depictions of bodies. And I always found it to be a fun film. It's obviously gone into a more infamous reputation after being riffed by Mystery Science Theater 3000, and also kind of has a footnote for being one of Robert Reed's early films, Mike Brady of the Brady Bunch. But Kenny, she also appeared in a bunch of TV shows at the time, had roles in The Millionaire, and showed up in Public Defender, Fireside Theater, Bonanza. But she ended up retiring from acting in the early 60s, even though she was still very young. But she found it very difficult to break out of the B-movie world because of her association with those roles. In an interview, she stated, "It's hard to grow out of it. When you go on an interview and your past credits are reviewed and all they see is teenage this and monster that, it's a turnoff. They do consider your past credits, and those sort of pictures don't help the situation." But she ended up moving out to Nevada, where she and her husband had a horse ranch, and she did stay active in radio broadcasting. And then, yes, just passed away this last June 25th, 2021. We also recently lost filmmaker Alfred Soul, age 78. Soul is probably best known for having directed and co-written the 1976 horror movie Alice, Sweet Alice, which also has a footnote in film history for being the feature film debut of Brooke Shields. Now, prior to that, he actually, I just was reading about this today with his obituary, he actually wanted to make his film debut with a Western and was approached by an investor who said, well, if you make an adult film for me with my money, then after that, I will produce a Western for you. I will finance a Western. So his first film was actually an adult film titled Deep Sleep, but the movie ended up running to problems with the authorities. The prints of it were confiscated. The movie was pulled from theaters, and Soul even faced some obscenity charges. So the Western never happened either, needless to say. But after Alice, Sweet Alice, he directed two more feature films, the cult 80s movie Tanya's Island, which pairs vanity up in a relationship with an ape, and then the horror spoof Pandemonium, which Vinegar Syndrome put out on Blu-ray not terribly long time ago. But he then transitioned really into a career in production design, which is where he kind of made his bread and butter for the rest of his career. I mean, he did do a little bit of writing in the 80s as well for TV. He wrote episodes of Friday the 13th, the series, Hotel, the 80s Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But it was really production design where he stayed for the remainder of his career, right up till just a couple of years ago. He worked on shows like Veronica Mars, the MacGyver reboot, Castle, some film credits too, like S. Darko, the much panned sequel to Donnie Darko, Wishmaster 2, Glory Days, a lot of TV movie work in there too. But yeah, he just passed away. His survivors include his cousin, Dante Tomaselli, who some might know as a horror filmmaker who made the movies Desecration and Satan's Playground, and who's been trying to get a remake of Alice, Sweet Alice off the ground for a little while. I'm not sure if that's made any progress or not. Another passing was of actress Nancy Berg, age 90, who was better known as a model. She was very successful in that. She was featured in Vogue and Life, but she did do some dramatic acting throughout mostly the 50s and 60s. I know her from her role in Failsafe, the famous nuclear war film from 1964, where she gets very aggressively rebuffed in her romantic overtures towards Walter Matthau. And she also appeared in the low-budget racing movie Thunder and Dixie, showed up on television series such as Perry Mason, Ben Casey, The Doctors. Pretty much after the mid-60s, though, she stopped acting up until she made one more appearance in 1980 in the pilot TV movie for the Michael Learned show Nurse. She was a very avid chess player as well. Had a really tough personal life, though. Married 3 times, and each one did not go well. Her first marriage was to actor Jeffrey Horn, who was best known for being the young male lead in The Bridge on the River Kwai, who is sent on the mission to destroy the bridge along with Jack Hawkins and William Holden. And Berg claimed that he basically left her and their child high and dry, abandoned them, took all the money. Her second marriage was to a doctor who she claimed abused her and her child physically. And then her last marriage also brought its own problems because it came with a stepson who very viciously attacked her, requiring plastic surgery and lost several teeth. So had a really kind of rough personal life in there, but very successful modeling career and also some acting there in the 50s and 60s. We also lost 2 very, very well-known pioneering visual effects artists just recently. Douglas Trumbull passed away, age 79, and he really came on the scene with his work on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And for some of the developments he pioneered in the field, he was given an Academy Award as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award, also nominated for his visual effects works on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and Blade Runner. He also worked on the effects for such films as The Andromeda Strain, Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, and he both worked on the effects for and was a producer on the 70s TV series The Star Lost. He also directed 2 films. The Bruce Stern science fiction movie Silent Running, which is a cult classic, and also the basic premise of which inspired Mystery Science Theater 3000 of a man on a space station with robots, and the 1983 movie Brainstorm, which was well received, but unfortunately, its legacy has been overshadowed by the fact that it was the film that Natalie Wood was starring in at the time of her death. And the other iconic visual effects artist to pass away was Robert Blalock, age 73. Blalock was one of the effects artists brought onto the original 1977 Star Wars. And when George Lucas made that film at 20th Century Fox, he wanted, obviously, the state-of-the-art effects, and Fox really didn't even have an effects department. So Blalock was one of the artists who came aboard, and as such was a co-founder of Industrial Light and Magic, the effects company that George Lucas founded. And for his work on Star Wars, he won an Academy Award in visual effects, and also went on to take home an Emmy Award for his contributions to the classic 1983 TV movie The Day After. Also worked on such films as the 1982 Cat People remake, Altered States, Wolfen, Airplane, RoboCop, from the original from 1987, and Carl Sagan's groundbreaking miniseries Cosmos. Also did some work on commercials and in theme park attractions. And finally, we also lost director Ivan Reitman, age 75. Titan of the comedy genre, especially in the 80s and 90s. Reitman directed both of the first 2 Ghostbusters movies, and those were 2 of several collaborations he had with actor Bill Murray. He really turned Bill Murray into a leading man because he gave him his first starring role in Meatballs, and they also did Stripes together as well. He also is the guy who showed Arnold Schwarzenegger could be a comedic actor with such films as Twins, Junior, and Kindergarten Cop. Some of the other flicks that he helmed were the Robert Redford movie Legal Eagles, the Kevin Kline comedy Dave, and the Harrison Ford box office hit 6 Days, 7 Nights. Often thought of as a pillar of the Canadian film scene, which he was, but he was actually, though, born in Czechoslovakia and moved, though, to Canada at a young age. He also had a really long career as a producer. Some of the credits include a couple of David Cronenberg's early movies, Rabid and Shivers, as well as National Lampoon's Animal House, Road Trip, Private Parts, both of the Space Jam movies, early entries in the Beethoven family film franchise, and more recently collaborated on a couple of his son's films, Jason Reitman, the director. They both were producers on Jason's film Up in the Air, which earned Ivan and Jason a Best Picture Academy Award nomination, as well as nominations for Jason for director and screenplay. And they collaborated on the most recent Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Afterlife. So one of those filmmakers who's just completely comes part and parcel with any recollections of the 1980s and what that decade meant for film. Some interesting developments for fans of Orson Welles have popped up recently, including the discovery of a lost Orson Welles short film. Now, back in the early 70s, 1970 to be specific, Welles shot 6 short films for Cartravision, which was a forerunner of VHS. It was a home video format. And he directed and wrote these 6 short films, only one of which was believed to still exist. But recently, the estate of Orson Welles purchased at auction 2 more of the short films. They have found copies of them. One of them, unfortunately, once they got their hands on it, was erased. There was nothing left on it. But the other one, which is titled Two Wise Old Men, Socrates and Noah, was intact. Now, this is basically kind of like a talking head piece that Welles made. It's him kind of sitting inside a house and then later on standing outside and and he relates these stories of Socrates and Noah. Interestingly, Welles had wanted to make a film about Noah earlier in his career. He had written a script called 2 by 2, but never got off the ground. No pun intended, I guess. The film runs 18 minutes long. Like I said, short movie. Always cool to see these lost works turn up. George Romero, they recently found a film he made called Amusement Park. Just really cool, though, that especially considering how many films, especially in the silent era, are lost completely, it's really gratifying when one of these can be unearthed. And also, speaking of Orson Welles' lost films, the hunt continues for Welles' original vision of his second feature-length directorial effort, The Magnificent Ambersons. So a little backstory on this. This is the film he directed after Citizen Kane, and his original cut of it ran over 2 hours long, about 131 minutes. And he was working on post-production on Ambersons while he was down in South America, in Brazil, shooting a movie called It's All True. And RKO, the studio that made Ambersons, as well as Welles' first feature film, Citizen Kane, the classic movie, they sent down copies of Ambersons as well as the movie Journey into Fear, which Welles had produced and co-written and starred in, so that he could work on the editing of these movies while he was shooting It's All True. But in his absence from Cali, from Hollywood, the preview of Ambersons did not go over well with audiences. So the studio ended up shortening the movie drastically to just under 90 minutes, and they reshot the ending. And this was without any involvement from Welles. So even though what we were left with is still considered this classic, the Criterion Collection just released it on Blu-ray a while back. It's always been wondered what Welles' original take on the movie was. And that footage, unfortunately, the actual film elements for that footage that was cut out of the movie were long since trashed by the studio. But there was a belief, that maybe a copy of this longer cut might still exist in Brazil. The reason being that RKO, they had instructed Cinedia Studios in Rio de Janeiro, which is the studio that Welles was operating out of in South America. They told this studio, just junk everything. Everything you've got of Ambersons and Journey into Fear that's there, just trash it. But Cinedia was owned by a gentleman named Adhemar Gonzaga. And he did tell RKO that he had done what they said, but he was a really well known, not just as this owner of the studio, but also just as a film lover. And documentary filmmaker Joshua Grossberg, about 25 years ago, he was on a trip to Brazil and met a guy who worked at the Cinedia archives in the late 50s and early 60s, a gentleman named Michel do Espírito Santo, who had reported to Grossberg that he saw an Orson Welles film print in a film can back when he worked at the studio, which would have been, significantly some time after those elements should have been trashed. Now, Santo could not confirm or deny what this print was, what was on it, but if there is any hope that a copy of Welles' original version of this movie, Magnificent Ambersons, exists, then it would be in Brazil. So Grossberg, he teamed up with Turner Classic Movies, and they've decided to partner together to fund an expedition, basically a cinematic archaeological expedition to see if this film can be found down in South America. Um, it's called the kind of referred to as the Lost Print team. This partnering of Grossberg and TCM, and Grossberg went down to South America last year and returned sometime, I think, November-ish, and said that he had developed some definitely some good leads in his trip there, and he needed to get some permissions to visit a major film archive, which he did, and that his return is scheduled for late January, early February. So, I'm recording this podcast on February 16th. So as far as I know right now, no news has developed on this front. A really good place to follow these kind of stories about Orson Welles is at the website wellsnet.com. But nothing new has popped up. So not sure if he did finally get down there, if he's found anything or not found anything. Of course, with COVID, I'm sure a lot of this traveling may have to be rearranged, but would be fascinating if they could find this missing cut of this film. They were able to reconstruct Wells's original version of his movie Touch of Evil. Of course, they just finished his film The Other Side of the Wind a couple years ago. So to finally take this sophomore directorial effort and put it back to where he had originally had it, just at least compare the two, that would be amazing. Honestly, it'd be a huge, one of the biggest lost film finds in some time, I imagine. Now turning to physical media, things that have been announced or released. Just dropped today, actually, and I'm really excited for this. Sony is going to release on 4K UHD the 1972 historical musical 1776. Now, this is one of my favorite films, one of my favorite musicals. It's a really great movie. I love, the musical genre as much as any other. When you really have a classic of that genre. But the trick with musicals, though, I think why for me personally, there's not too many I would refer to as classics for myself, is because you have to find a film that not only is the story engaging, but also the songs themselves are memorable. I mean, it's kind of like reminds me of, the trick with comedy. There are a number of films that I consider comedy classics, but not to the same degree as other genres, because with a comedy, a lot of times you'll have a comedy that has some really funny jokes in it, but if you weigh those as a percentage of the overall amount of jokes or humor in the movie, they might be a very small, or maybe the humor's engaging, but the story's really trivial or boring. And that can happen with musicals too, where it's like either, maybe the story's engaging, but the songs are unmemorable, or vice versa. So it's tricky, for me personally, to walk away from a musical and say, okay, that was really great. And there are some, Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite movies of all time. I really love the sound of music, but others not so much, But 1776, this is a film we'll probably take a deeper dive into around the 4th of July, because that's when I watch it, and this release will be out in time for that. It's just an incredibly well-acted film, great performances all around. It's funny. It's engaging over its entire 3-hour length. Just really an unheralded classic, I think, because it's generally regarded as a good film, a solid film. That's the takeaway that most people have. I think it's a bit underrated in that sense. I think it's really on that upper level of classic musicals and really deserves that kind of attention. So cool that that's finally going to get a release on UHD. They already had a really solid Blu-ray of it from a 4K scan, but this will be nice to see that extra bump in quality. All right, so let's now take a very, very, very deep dive. Very deep, because this is going to be about a film that most people have probably never heard of. into a film I just watched for the first time the other night, and this is a 1974 TV movie called Panic on the 522. And this is about three guys, three friends, who used to be in their younger days members of the same street gang called the Serpents, who are living these kind of low life, dead end, blue collar existences, who decide to make it big, get their break by holding up a luxury car on the 522 commuter train out of New York. And like I said, this is not even one of the better known TV movies of its era. It had a VHS release from Good Times, which is how I watched it. But not only is it never seen a DVD release or anything like that, it's not even on YouTube, which is pretty surprising. Usually these at least find their way there, even if it's in crappy quality. Just a couple bootlegs out there you can track down on DVD if you really want to see it after hearing my thoughts on it. I love 70s TV movies, though. Big surprise there. But aside from just the things I like about any 70s movie, you know, the decor, the production design, wardrobe, the thing about the TV movies is they're this great crossroads of talent where you'll have these veterans of the golden age of Hollywood show up in a production that will also have people who are popular in television at the time, and then maybe throw in some future film stars just starting out. It's this great mixture of different levels of talent. You know, I guess a random example that just comes to my head, there's a 70s TV movie called Murder on Flight 502. It's a kind of like an airline disaster movie, and it's got Walter Pidgeon's in it and Ralph Bellamy, whose careers, they've been around forever, going back to like the 30s, Academy Award nominated actors. It's also, though, has Danny Bonaducci, who's kind of a hot at the moment member of the cast coming from the Partridge Family. It's got Farrah Fawcett as her star is starting to rise. It has also, though, Brooke Adams before she really hit it with films like Days of Heaven and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So just really cool to see all these people coming from these different classes of acting in terms of their success, where they were on their trajectory, all in the same project together. And that happens a lot in 70s TV movies with this decade. So let's just take probably what someone says an unnecessarily intensive look at this film. And starting off just with the characters, we'll start with our three hold-up men. So we've got Robert Walden of TV's Lou Grant. He plays Eddie, who's the guy who kind of concocts this entire robbery scheme. He's working a job as a delivery guy for a liquor store, and when making a delivery to the train car, sees that these are very wealthy, successful people, and they would make great targets, a great opportunity to kind of rob them and take their spoils to start a new life for him and his two friends. James Sloyan is Frankie. Sloyan worked mostly in TV, just a long history as a character actor, popped up in several of the Star Trek franchises, had a recurring role on Murder, She Wrote, and film-wise, probably best remembered for playing Mottola, who is Robert Shaw's hood, who gets conned, I should say, by Robert Redford at the beginning of The Sting, and that kind of kicks off events in that films. And he's kind of the unhinged one in this trio, more so as time progresses in the film. And there's an allusion to the fact that he might have some mental health issues, like legit ones. At the beginning of the film, he visits a priest who asks him if he's still having his headaches. And then last of the three is Rennie Santoni. You might know him, depending on where you sit with cop films, as either the partner to Dirty Harry in the first Dirty Harry film, or the partner to Sylvester Stallone in Cobra. But he plays Emil, who's a dim-witted sort of fellow, very much in the vein of Lenny from Of Mice and Men. And now, who are they going to rob? Who are the people who ride this train? Well, we've got Lawrence Luckinbill and Linda Day George playing a married couple. Now, I love Linda Day George. Mission Impossible, she was on that, and then just made a slew of films with her real-life husband, Christopher George, including two of my favorite late 70s, early 80s horror movies, Day of the Animals and Pieces. And Lawrence Luckinbill, again, a character actor, just a working character actor, probably best remembered for his roles in the films The Boys in the Band and then Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, where he played the film's antagonist, Sybok, Spock's half-brother. And in real life, Luckinbill, still with us, is the husband of Lucy Arnaz, Lucy and Desi's daughter. And Luckinbill, he plays an advertising executive, and he and George kind of have this troubled marriage where she relieves her boredom by picking up strange men and sleeping with them in seedy hotels. Dana Elkar, also was in The Sting, but of TV's MacGyver, plays Hal Rogers, who's the bigwig at a computer company. And Lyndon Childs, yet again, another very prolific character actor. I always associate him with one of my favorite 80s movies, Cloak and Dagger, where he plays the airport security chief at the film's climax. He plays Tony Ebsen, who's basically Dana Elkar's right-hand man. We've got Dennis Patrick of Dark Shadows fame and who starred in the classic 1970 movie Joe, kind of playing a variation on his character from that movie. He plays, in this film, Dudley Stevenson, who runs a charity and kind of decides who gets money from this charity. And kind of somewhat key to the developing plot of this TV movie is that he has recently acquired through an auction a Stradivarius violin. Also on board the train is Edward Franz, the older character actor whose career started in the late 40s. He kind of started a little later in life, in his mid to late 40s himself, but then racked up a whole bunch of really impressive films right out the gate, from playing one of these scientists in the original version of The Thing from Another World. He played von Stauffenberg in The Desert Fox, and in this movie he plays Jerry, who's a businessman whose business really isn't well defined. It sounds like it's something in the world of finances, but whose character also is very much someone who appreciates culture. And he shares some scenes with Stuart Moss, another prolific character actor in TV and film in the 70s, who plays Joe, probably the least defined, least sketched out character in this whole film. Again, he's appears to be in some kind of financial business. They don't really get into it too much. And we're going to come back to that, kind of like some of the stranger aspects of this script, about almost like there's gaps in it. Andrew Duggan, yet again, another veteran character actor with a great gravelly voice, an actor who I always immediately conjure up the image of him playing the original John Walton in the TV movie The Homecoming, which later led to the series The Waltons, where Ralph Waite took on the role. And horror movie fans will know Duggan from his many collaborations with filmmaker Larry Cohen, such as Bone, It's Alive, A Return to Salem's Lot. He plays General Harlan Garner, who is a former military general who works for the banking industry, but still is involved in military activities going on in South America. And this results in him losing his job, as the bank wants to avoid having their reputation tarnished by what he's participating in. And playing his paramour is Ina Balin as Countess Hedy Tovarese, who is a cosmetics queen. And Balin's probably the closest thing this movie has to a traditional film star. She came up in the late 50s, early 60s, and worked in some studio products such as Martin Ritt's The Black Orchid. She was in Michael Curtiz's Western The Comancheros with John Wayne, and actually won the Golden Globe for most promising newcomer for the Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward drama From the Terrace. But pretty much, by the end of the 60s, was starting to really just move strictly into TV work, and sadly died at a pretty young age, only 52, when she passed away in 1990 from pulmonary hypertension. And last of the passengers is Bernie Casey. The great Bernie Casey. Gotta love him as the head gargoyle in the classic 1970s TV movie horror TV film Gargoyles, but who appeared in everything from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to playing Felix Leiter in Never Say Never Again. He showed up in some blaxploitation films in the 70s, and he plays professional basketball player Wendell Weaver in the movie. And to top things off, there's Charles Lampkin, yet again, another veteran character actor who plays George, who is the car's bartender. And Lampkin, he made his film debut back in the early 50s, and probably what, if anyone would say, is his best remembered role playing one of the survivors of an apocalyptic event in Arch Oboler's movie 5. So there you have it. That's your passengers, your bandits. And even though I just was selling 1970s TV movies on the basis of their providing an intersection of performers of different star calibers, as you can tell from my breakdown of the cast here, this is really a film that's basically all character actors, all character performers. I mean, you do have, like I said, Ina Balin, Linda Day George, closest to the two who are closest to having any kind of movie star status. But this one really is just about veteran performers filling all the roles. The movie starts off on a Monday and then works its way through the work week, introducing us to the various characters before we conclude at Friday, which is when the actual heist takes place. And the film starts and closes with narration. And this film doesn't really enjoy any kind of great lasting reputation, probably explaining partially why it's never had any post VHS release. And even though I enjoyed watching it, how could you not? I can see why people might not love this film. Starting with its identity crisis. Like I said, it's got this narration, which is kind of setting the stage for this to be kind of a robbery that represents a class struggle between the entitled, apathetic rich who travel through the slums in their posh commuter car and the people of the streets just struggling to get by, who bring the horrors of street life into their world. And even the closing narration acts like you've just seen that movie. But when you're actually watching the film, the problem is that for the most part, these people who ride this commuter car, they're really not terribly unlikable. Yeah, they're successful, but they're not self-righteous terribly. I mean, the Robert Mandan's character, the doctor, they show him being in the hospital, being called to a meeting and refusing to go right away because he's trying to save the life of a patient. Bernie Casey's basketball player, we see him leaving an arena to grab a taxi to the train, and he spends some time talking to a kid who you can tell doesn't really have a lot of money and is just trying to get by. And this is stands in stark contrast to our three holdup men, who kind of just come across like idiots. Like, they don't really represent the kind of seething masses as much as they do just kind of incompetence, who really are kind of to blame themselves for where they are in life. And the robbery itself, this is something you see in people's critique of this film. The robbery itself is pretty stupid. It's kind of one of the interesting parts of the script is that they break into this car and take the jewelry from people, things like that, but they quickly come to realize that none of these people really carry a lot of cash. They have their money given to their financial advisors, and they get a little bit of cash doled out to them just to get through the week. But whereas our criminals were hoping to make a big score, there really isn't much to be had in the way of hard currency, which is where Dennis Patrick his character having won a Stradivarius at an auction comes into play, because that turns out to be kind of the main thing of value on this car, is this antique worth 6 figures in 1974 money. The idea behind the robbery, the actual plan of it, is also problematic, although that's, I think, less a fault of the characters as much as the writers, because the idea is that once the criminals break into this car, the conductor isn't supposed to come back through for a 45-minute time period during which they would be alone with their victims. And while that, I don't know, I don't know enough about 1974 New York City commuter trains to wax intelligent on that. There's many points in this film where they're shooting off their guns as a way to intimidate their victims. And I just can't for the life of me believe that no one would hear those gunshots, even if a conductor's not going through that train and it's riding along tracks. I mean, there's occupied, we see that there's the cars behind this luxury car are occupied with basically, coach economy commuters. So the idea that none of those people would even hear those gunshots or kind of inquire as to what's going on, that's a bit of a tough stretch as well. Now, these issues with the film's plot, in terms of it not always having the best logic, or in terms of it not really knowing what kind of commentary is trying to get across, do these get laid at the feet of the writer? The film was written by Eugene Price, who started out writing scripts for low-budget films and then went strictly into TV work for the rest of his career. A couple TV movies, lots of episodic television like Marcus Welby, MD, Capital, General Hospital. But I'm not entirely sure, because I feel like watching this movie that there's stuff that was maybe written or maybe even filmed that was cut out. Now, the movie only runs 74 minutes without commercials. It was meant to fill in a movie of the week 90-minute slot. And I just kind of almost left with the impression after watching it that they shot stuff and were like, oh, we've got too much stuff. We can't fill this time bracket, so let's just cut stuff out. And part of the reason I feel that way when watching it is because, for example, both Stuart Moss and Edward Franz's characters, I mean, you find almost nothing out about their background, like who they are. Like they're in a car together, sharing a ride, and they talk about finances in this kind of vague way. And we know that Edward Franz's character works in an office and he has a limousine, and that's even more that we know about Stuart Moss's character. But the fact that they wouldn't even provide any kind of clue as to what they do, like they do with some of the other characters, maybe they just didn't want to take the time to do that. But it also kind of feels like maybe they did and they cut that out. And even when we have a moment with one of the criminals near the beginning of the film, James Sloyan, he talks to this priest, like I mentioned before. He's got a scene where he talks to the priest about his headaches. The priest talks to him during confession and says, "Are you still having those headaches?" And literally, it cuts to the next scene like a millisecond after the priest says that. Like part of the word headaches trails over into the next shot, which is an exterior shot. And they in fact never discuss these headaches again, except that you're supposed to draw the conclusion as we see James Sloyan's character becoming more erratic in his behavior throughout the heist. I think we're supposed to draw obviously the conclusion that he has some kind of mental health issues. But maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe it's just badly written or quickly written, or maybe there were rewrites on it that Price wasn't responsible for. You kind of wonder, though, if you're going to have these characters, again, going back to two of the passengers who are getting robbed, the characters played by Stuart Moss and Edward Franz, if you're going to have characters in this scenario who are so loosely and vaguely defined, why have them at all? I mean, I'm sure after listening to my breakdown of everyone in this movie, you're like, well, that's a lot of people. And especially in a movie that's 74 minutes, can't we lose a couple of them? I mean, do we really need to have... Stuart Moss's character is probably the best example. After we meet him and the heist starts, he pretty much has virtually almost no function in the film. And definitely nothing that couldn't have been handed off to another character. And compounding this even further is the fact that Moss is unbilled for this part. No mention in the opening or closing credits. And even though Moss was never any kind of A-list star, he had been acting for 10 years, tons of TV work. He's remembered for guesting on a couple episodes of the original Star Trek. He had already by this time actually gotten top billing in American International's horror B movie The Bat People, in which he was paired with his real life wife, actress Marianne McAndrew of Hello Dolly fame. So you look at his character in Panic on the 522, you see how poorly sketched it is. I wonder if that played any part in why he didn't take credit for this. This television movie aired on November 20th of 1974. It was an ABC Wednesday Movie of the Week, and that's only about a little more than a month after the American premiere, the national premiere of the classic feature film, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, which, for those not familiar with it, is where Robert Shaw leads a quartet of villains to take over a subway car and demand ransom for it. And Walter Matthau plays the transportation cop who goes up against him. And I wonder if that film shot in the end of 73. Pelham 1, 2, 3 shot from the end of 1973 to the beginning of 74 and was based on a novel that was already out. But I wonder if the reason Panic on the 522 exists is in part because they knew that film was going to be hitting theaters and they were trying to cash in on that. And if there was any kind of rush to 522's production to kind of, take advantage of the publicity around Pelham 1, 2, 3, maybe that could account for some of the shoddiness that happened and resulted on 522. Still crazy that Stuart Moss is not billed at all in this film. I'm curious as to why. I did try to check up on like newspapers.com, see if there were any articles about the making of the film. Couldn't really find anything. Moss, poor fellow, isn't even credited on the Internet Movie Database for this part. But regarding the acting in the film, I have, my props go to James Sloyan, who I think delivers the film's really most memorable performance as Frankie, the unhinged one. He has this great voice, this great delivery to his voice. It's a little higher pitched, has a little bit of a lisp. So when he gets worked up, it's just got this really nice energy to it, this really nice vibe to it. And Dennis Patrick, someone I've always liked a lot. And like I said, he's great in the film Joe, which I just saw this past year. Phenomenal film. Check it out. Starring Peter Boyle, 1970 movie. Patrick has a really good moment squaring off against James Sloyan's character after the robbers board the train, the train car, and start collecting people's jewelry and stuff. Patrick has like a knife, a letter opener of some sort tucked away, and he tries to pull it on Sloyan, and they have a nice little confrontation there. I'm not sure what's going on in terms of other performances. I'm not sure really what's going on with Lawrence Lockenbill on this film. He's generally I've always looked at him as like a solid, if not necessarily memorable actor. No offense to him. But he dresses like, and this might not be his fault, this could be the wardrobe department. He dresses like he's a Broadway producer with like this trench coat draped or longer coat draped over his shoulders. He's got like a fedora, and at times he's kind of talking with like the southern accent, which seems to kind of come and go. So one moment he's just a typical commuter with his troubled marriage. Next thing you know, he sounds like a southern aristocrat. So I'm not sure what direction he was trying to go in with any of that. Everyone else is pretty solid, pretty on the money. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Delivering that kind of like that stable character actor work. Santoni's performance as the slow Emile, that's kind of the most cartoonish one in the whole film. I don't know to what degree that. Again, do you blame the actor for that? The director? What guidance did they give him? How was it written in the script? But just to kind of insert this, like I said, of Mice and Men Lenny character in the middle of things. I mean, when he first shows up, when you first meet this character, he's holding up a Hasidic Jew who he thinks is part of the diamond business, the jewelry business, but who turns out not to actually have any money. And just he plays the part so cartoonishly that it's kind of really hard to take his character seriously. You really don't take any of these. That's another problem. You really don't take any of these bad guys, for lack of a better word. You don't take any of them seriously when they board the train, because they're just presented as kind of like almost like moronic and cartoonish, and not really demonstrating any kind of like pent up rage about where they are in life and their social standing. It's just kind of a trio of bums, frankly, who really bungle this robbery from the get go. That they don't even think in terms of like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of wealthy people in this car, but that doesn't mean that they're going to have necessarily be carrying a bunch of cash. So it's always a problem when you're watching a movie and a movie built around a criminal act where the criminals uh, don't really come across like they're of any weight or threat to the people they're trying to take advantage of. And the victims um, don't help sell the gravity of the situation either, always. Um, in one of the film's kind of more ridiculous scenes, a little bit of a spoiler alert for those who are going to go onto eBay and actually track down a VHS of this. When they board the train, they wear ski masks, the criminals, which they're really, they got some pretty sweet 1970s vintage ski masks. I've actually spent probably way too much time on eBay since watching this movie trying to find 1970s ski masks for myself after watching this. Probably one of the best things about the movie. But in a ludicrous scene, a scene that really is used to escalate matters, is Linda J. George convinces Rennie Santoni to remove his mask. And when I was first watching it, I assumed that this was some kind of ploy on her part to get an upper hand over the criminals and help them get back control of the train. But no, literally, she just feels bad for him that he's wearing this mask and he's probably really hot, and convinces him to take it off, which, of course, means everybody on the train now can identify Emil, and causes the other criminals to think, well, maybe we can't let these people go. Maybe we have to kill them all. Which brings you right back to a problem I just discussed a second ago. Okay, now you've elevated the stakes. You've gone from these criminals just wanting to pull off a robbery, and that puts our cast in some kind of immediate but maybe non-lethal danger as long as they comply. And now you've elevated to the point where, okay, they might actually kill these people. They might lose their lives. But because we don't really take these villains too seriously, we don't look at them as too threatening, are we really going to buy the idea that they're going to like wipe out like 8 or 9 people just to avoid being identified for a robbery? I mean, they get into a discussion about that where James Slane's character, as he becomes more unhinged, really is afraid of going back to prison where he's been before and really wants to just kill all these people. And Robert Walden's character is trying to reason him out of it, that would obviously result in a much worse sentence. But just the idea that even is a thought that's crossing their mind, that that's something they consider, it instead of really selling them as more dangerous or making us feel like the situation's gotten a lot more threatening or worse, it just makes things seem even more ludicrous and cartoonish that they've considering that as even a possible way of handling the situation. Now, this TV movie was directed by Harvey Hart. Hart was a Canadian-born director who, throughout his career, moved back and forth between filming stuff in the States and filming stuff in his native country. He worked in both TV and film. He directed lots of episodic TV, episodes of Peyton Place, of Columbo, Medical Center, Dan August, and he also did a number of other TV movies as well. One of my personal favorites of 1980 is this science fiction TV movie called The Aliens Are Coming, which was an attempt to launch a TV series that did not go over well, but it's a film I really enjoy a lot, and I think that'd be a fun one to cover later on this podcast. Hart also directed an episode of the original Star Trek, Mud's Women, and he did a number of feature films, some of which actually have gone into procure a really good reputation. He did Dark Intruder, which was a Leslie Nielsen horror movie set in like the late 19th, early 20th century, which was actually a Universal's attempt to launch a TV series. It didn't get picked up, and they released it as a feature film. And Kino Lorber just released that on Blu-ray, and that has a really strong cult reputation. He did the Karen Black, Christopher Plummer movie, The Pix, which is a really highly regarded horror movie, mixture of horror and police work. He did the film adaptation of Fortune in Men's Eyes, the prison story. I mean, Panic on the 522, it was competently directed. Nothing super memorable or unforgettable about it, but no glaring mistakes either in terms of the directing, other than maybe what role Hart may have played in what we talked about with issues with the story and why things just seem not to be explained or well sketched out. But yeah, Panic on the 522. I remember this VHS tape from when I was a kid. It was at a thrift store I went to, and always kind of stuck with me. And that's really what led me to track this down on eBay. Picked up a copy for like $10. It's too bad it's not more readily available. I think even when you have a TV movie like this that really isn't any kind of golden example, shining example of the genre of the decade, but it's still just entertaining to watch. It's still fun, and I wish that more of these were available in better quality, even if it was just streaming on like Prime or something. But hey, maybe you'll stumble across it at a yard sale someday, dust off the VCR, and give this one a watch, or someone will stick it up on YouTube. Panic on the 522. That was this week's new watch. I think that about rounds things up for this episode of Carpet City Cinema. Thank you for spending the time with us, and catch you next week.